Near a massive waterfall, a humanoid alien watches as a starship departs the planet. The alien retrieves a pot filled with a black liquid and proceeds to drink it. Immediately, the liquid begins to take over its body, turning its skin black and dissolving its DNA, causing the alien to fall into the water. As its body dissolves, its DNA is carried away by the current. In 2089, a team of archaeologists led by Doctors Elizabeth and Charlie discovers ancient cave paintings in Scotland, estimated to be at least 35,000 years old. These paintings match a series of others found across the globe from various cultures that couldn't have shared the same knowledge. 2 years later, the starship Prometheus leaves Earth, with the crew in cryosleep. The robot David is responsible for taking care of the ship during their slumber. In his free time, David explores human behaviors, such as playing sports, watching movies, dyeing his hair, and learning ancient languages. He also takes an interest in spying on the crew's dreams, including one where Elizabeth recalls a childhood memory of witnessing an African tribe bury a man, prompting her father to explain the diverse beliefs surrounding death. After 2 years of travel, the ship reaches its destination, and David wakes the entire crew, which consists of mercenaries and scientists. As they recover from the effects of cryosleep and eat to fill their empty stomachs, Captain Yannick decorates the ship with a Christmas tree, despite having missed the holidays. Meredith, who oversees ensuring everyone does their jobs correctly, finds this gesture foolish. Soon, the mission briefing begins, and Meredith plays a holographic recording of Peter, the CEO of Wayland Corporation, which funded the expedition. Peter explains that by the time they watch the recording, he'll be dead, and that David is the closest thing to a son he'll ever have. Peter reveals his lifelong desire to discover where humans come from and what happens after death, which led him to fund this mission when Elizabeth and Charlie presented their theory. The doctors take over and explain that the paintings they found around the world depicted a star map leading to a planet with its own sun capable of sustaining life, which is where they are now. Elizabeth believes these maps were left by aliens she calls engineers, whom she theorizes created humankind, though the rest of the crew remains skeptical. Moments later, Meredith summons the doctors to her private quarters, where she has her own medical pod and self-contained life support. She expresses her doubts about the significance of the cave drawings and states that she's participating in this mission for Peter, emphasizing her responsibility to ensure the funds aren't wasted. She warns the doctors that if they discover life, they are forbidden from making contact, leaving the doctors puzzled as to why they are even there. David, who spent the last 2 years studying ancient languages, is confident he can communicate with the engineers. However, when he sends a message to the planet, there is no response. The crew decides it's time to land, and the ship descends through the atmosphere, detecting no radio signals or heat sources, suggesting there's no civilization below. Despite this, Charlie notices straight lines on the ground, indicating they couldn't have occurred naturally, so the ship lands at that spot. The crew prepares to explore, and David dons a suit, even though he doesn't need it, as he was designed to blend in with humans. The team takes vehicles to a dome-like structure, which geologist Fifield can't determine if it's natural but is sure it's hollow. Inside, Fifield sends out special probes that map the area, allowing the crew to navigate through a series of corridors. As they venture deeper, they discover a water source heated by sunlight, and the CO2 levels are acceptable. While the outside atmosphere is toxic, inside, it's breathable. Charlie assumes the aliens were terraforming the area and risks removing his helmet, confirming the air is safe. The rest of the crew follows suit and removes their helmets to continue exploring. David discovers a wall covered in a strange goo and various symbols, which he activates using his knowledge of ancient languages. This triggers a sudden hologram of running figures through the corridors, and the crew follows them until they find the body of an alien lying next to a door that apparently killed it. Sensing danger, Fifield, a geologist, decides he isn't needed and, along with biologist Milburn, opts to return to the ship. Meanwhile, the doctors examine the alien's body, and David manages to open the door, finding the alien's head in excellent condition on the other side. The rest of the crew discovers more bodies, indicating the species is extinct. They also observe worms in the room, showing life is possible, along with a monolithic statue of a humanoid head, murals on the ceiling, and a collection of stone cylinders. David notices that the cylinders are sweating, and one of them begins to emit a black organic substance. Elizabeth, however, is focused on the murals, which start to change. She concludes that they've altered the atmosphere in the room and decides they need to leave. As she and Charlie begin to bag the head to take with them, David stealthily takes one of the cylinders, realizing the cave might be a tomb. At that moment, Yannick detects a dangerous storm approaching and warns the doctors. Meredith gives them 15 minutes to return to the ship before she closes the ramp. The crew rushes out of the cave and drives back to the ship just in time. However, the alien head falls from the vehicle, and Elizabeth goes back to retrieve it, causing the storm to catch up to her and infiltrate the ship. Charlie tries to save her by driving into the storm, but he ends up stuck as well, and ultimately, David has to pull them in with wires. Afterward, the crew decontaminates their bodies in the hangar, only to discover that Milburn and Fifield haven't returned. The two scientists are actually lost inside the cave. Yannick contacts them, explaining they can't be picked up until the storm passes, meaning they'll need to wait until morning. Meanwhile, the team sterilizes the alien head, and a quick scan reveals it's not an exoskeleton but a helmet. When they open it, they find a humanoid alien head inside, with new cells forming on its forehead. They decide to run a stem line into its brain to make it think it's alive. The trick works, and the face starts to move, but the overstimulation causes the head to explode. Elizabeth takes a closer look at the sample she took from the head and is thrilled to discover that its DNA matches a human's, proving her theory that these beings created the human race. Meanwhile, David goes to update a cryosleep pod that holds a mysterious person, known only to him and Meredith. Meredith angrily demands that David tell her what the person said, but he only responds that they were told to try harder. David then inspects the cylinder he brought in private and finds a collection of capsules filled with black liquid. This gives him an idea, and he decides to visit Charlie, sharing a drink with him as they discuss how far they'd go for answers. Later, Charlie joins Elizabeth in her room, and she shares the news about the DNA, leading them to celebrate by getting intimate. In the cave, Milburn and Fifield stumble upon a pile of alien bodies when they receive a call from Yannick, who warns them that the scanner detected signs of life nearby. The scientists begin to worry, but the signal on the scanner suddenly disappears, which Yannick attributes to a glitch. Eventually, Milburn and Fifield find the room with the monolith and see the black liquid seeping from the cylinders. To their surprise, they discover a reptilian-like alien swimming in the liquid. When Milburn approaches, the creature latches onto his arm, attempting to break it. Fifield cuts the creature off, but the alien's corrosive fluid sprays onto his helmet, eating through the plastic and reaching his face. As Fifield writhes in pain, the creature enters Milburn's suit and kills him. The next morning, Charlie wakes up feeling unwell and notices something strange in his eyes. Yannick informs everyone that the storm has passed, but he still can't reach the missing scientists, so the crew decides to search for them. David, however, stays behind, purposely taking a different path and sending a recording of what he sees to Meredith. He discovers another room filled with thousands of cylinders and alien armor, then follows a corridor to a chamber containing several cryosleep capsules. David cuts off communication with Meredith before activating a central machine, which reveals holograms of the engineers examining a star map that includes Earth. After the show ends, David notices that one of the cryosleep capsules is glowing. It still contains a living engineer. Meanwhile, Charlie is struggling during their search, repeatedly stumbling, and Elizabeth realizes he's sick, but he insists on continuing. Eventually, they find Milburn's body and approach it, causing a small alien reptile to leap out and slither away. However, Fifield is nowhere to be found. As Charlie's condition worsens, Elizabeth orders everyone to return to the ship to quarantine him. By the time they reach the hangar, Charlie's skin has started to turn black. There, Meredith is waiting with a flamethrower, determined to prevent Charlie from boarding the ship. Yannick and Elizabeth argue with her, but Charlie, accepting his fate, walks directly toward Meredith, who incinerates him while Elizabeth watches in anguish. The crew is quarantined, and David runs tests on Elizabeth to ensure she wasn't infected by Charlie. To their shock, the scan reveals that Elizabeth is 3 months pregnant, impossible, as she had been in cryosleep for the past 3 months. The fetus appears to have a strange, alien shape, and Elizabeth demands it be removed, but David explains they lack the means and personnel for such a procedure. Suddenly, Elizabeth experiences excruciating abdominal pain. David sedates her, but some time later, crew members attempt to place her in cryosleep to deal with the fetus later. Refusing to carry the alien creature, Elizabeth fights them off and escapes, eventually finding Meredith's medical pod. Desperate, she requests a caesarean, but the pod is only calibrated for male patients. Instead, Elizabeth orders the extraction of a foreign body. The machine complies, administering anesthetics that are insufficient to dull the unbearable pain as a claw removes the alien fetus from her body. The creature immediately bursts out, revealing a terrifying alien that flails its tentacles in an attempt to free itself. Elizabeth endures the assault while the machine stitches her wound. As soon as the procedure is complete, she leaves the pod, trapping the alien inside and leaving it to be subdued by the remaining anesthetics. Meanwhile, Yannick notices a strange figure near the ship, which turns out to be a mutated Fifield. He attacks the crew in the hangar, initiating a fierce battle. Bullets prove ineffective against Fifield, so they resort to using a flamethrower to kill him. Elizabeth wanders the ship, eventually reaching the infirmary, where she is shocked to find that Peter is still alive. He was the person David had been communicating with in the extra cryosleep chamber, and the medical pod was intended for him. Peter is determined to meet his maker and demand answers, so David plans to take him to the engineer they discovered in the cave. Despite Elizabeth's warnings that the planet is dangerous and not what they expected, she is ignored. Unwilling to give up, she pushes through her pain and suits up to return to the cave. Yannick intercepts her, explaining that this isn't the engineer's home planet but likely a military installation where they created the deadly black liquid. He suggests returning to Earth, but Elizabeth convinces him to stay until she contacts the last surviving engineer. Peter prepares to leave as well, but Meredith tries to dissuade him from dying in what she calls some hole, revealing that she is his daughter. Peter dismisses her concerns. Upon reaching the cave, David instructs everyone to remove their helmets, confident that the disease isn't airborne, subtly implying that he was responsible for spiking Charlie's drink with the black liquid. The crew enters a new chamber filled with thousands of cylinders, which David identifies as a cargo hold. This new perspective makes Yannick and Meredith realize that they are inside a starship, not a cave. David activates the ship's systems and explains that the engineers were preparing to depart for Earth when they lost control of the black liquid, which ultimately killed them. They awaken the last engineer, and Elizabeth attempts to ask him questions. However, Peter has one of his mercenaries silence her with a blow, allowing him to ask his philosophical questions. David translates into Proto-Indo-European, but the engineer responds by ripping off David's head and using it to kill Peter. The engineer then attacks the mercenaries, who futilely waste bullets on him. Back on the ship, Meredith witnesses Peter's death through David's eyes and orders Yannick to prepare for departure. Meanwhile, Elizabeth flees as the engineer activates his ship, intending to fly to Earth. This action triggers the opening of multiple areas on the ground, and Elizabeth narrowly escapes by leaping through them while urging Yannick to stop the engineer, warning that the black liquid could reach Earth and annihilate humanity. Prometheus isn't equipped for combat, and Meredith believes they should flee, but Yannick ignores her and orders his pilots to warm up the ion propulsion, planning to turn the ship into a projectile. Meredith rushes out of the ship, and Yannick permits his pilots to do the same, but they choose to remain with their captain. In a matter of seconds, both ships collide in midair, successfully preventing the engineer from leaving. However, the wreckage plummets to the ground, forcing Elizabeth and Meredith to run for their lives. Meredith isn't fast enough and perishes, but Elizabeth survives by finding shelter next to a rock. She then returns to Prometheus to gather supplies and hears strange noises inside. Grabbing an axe, she investigates and discovers that her alien offspring has escaped the medical pod and grown to a monstrous size. At that moment, David contacts Elizabeth and warns her to run, but it's too late. The engineer arrives and pins her against the wall, intending to kill her. Thinking quickly, Elizabeth opens a nearby door, releasing the alien offspring, which immediately attacks the engineer. As Elizabeth escapes, her offspring thrusts an ovipositor down the engineer's throat, overpowering him. Outside the ship, Elizabeth is on the verge of a breakdown when David contacts her again, revealing that the engineers have more ships hidden underground, and he can pilot one of them. Elizabeth retrieves David's head and body but makes one request. Instead of returning to Earth, she wants to go to the engineers' home planet. Though David doesn't fully understand her desperation, he agrees. Before leaving the planet on the alien ship, Elizabeth sends a final message to Earth from Prometheus, explaining what transpired. Moments later, a black alien emerges from the dead engineer, confirming that this story is the predecessor to Ripley's tale. So, what did you think of this movie? Leave it in the comments below. If you liked the video, like, share, and subscribe for more movie recaps. This will motivate me to recap interesting movies. See you next time.